Okay, we're back and we're going to continue our lecture over Chapter 5. We've gotten to slide number 33 over the Second Continental Congress that meets in May of 1775. So let's look at that slide and dig right in, and I'll help you complete your notes here. Okay, the Second Continental Congress meets May of 1775. This is just a couple weeks after the Lexington and Concord events in Massachusetts. The meeting is taking place in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania colony. Colonial representatives are gathering from every colony, once again, except Georgia. Georgia, in fact, did not initially bring or send a delegate. However, by mid-May, after the group had already been meeting for a short time, there is a guy by the name of Lyman Hall. You don't need to know for the test, but a guy named Lyman Hall was admitted as a delegate from one of the parishes in Georgia, not necessarily as an official royal delegate, or not royal, but official delegate from the colony, but he was seated as a representative from Georgia, so he could at least be there in some capacity. But nevertheless, we have folks gathering. There's discussions, as you can well imagine, abound. Benjamin Franklin is part of this group, as well as George Washington, John and Samuel Adams. A lot of the big figureheads in what would become the Revolution are there. A lot of our founding fathers. Ben Franklin, in fact, had just arrived from England, where he was serving as a colonial agent, and he basically got chased out of Parliament during some incensed discussions from ministers of Parliament about what was taking place in the colonies, right? So as soon as he gets off the boat, they grab Ben Franklin, and there's people waiting at the wharf for him. And he's like, "Hey, hello, gentlemen." And he says, they say, "Well, hey, Ben, we're glad you made it back. We need you to sit in on the Second Continental Congress as a delegate from Pennsylvania." So Franklin goes from one political mess right into a fresh one as soon as he gets off the boat. Now, there were a number of accomplishments of the Second Continental Congress, and a number of these you need to know for the test. Let's start at least with some background. They created and organized, or at least authorized, the formation of a Continental Army. That was an official act of the Second Continental Congress. There was no Continental Army. There was only the British Royal Army, and then militia, who are citizen volunteer, part-time, reservist guardsmen. But this Congress said, no, we need an official patriot army to serve against what appears to be unfettered British aggression. They also authorized the formation of a Continental Navy, because again, there was no official Patriot Navy. So this was kind of a token gesture. Remember, England is one of the biggest sea powers on the globe at the time. So this is a real token gesture. They authorized the construction of 13 frigate-sized warships. These are medium-hull, pretty fast ships, but they only hold usually around 30 to 32 guns per ship. Not like a dreadnought or a battleship, but significant enough to be of value. So they authorized the construction of them and the purchase of merchant ships for conversion to battleships, or not battleships, but ships that can be used for battle. So again, not ideal militarily, but it's a gesture anyway. Okay. They authorized the commissions for privateers. Now, privateers are essentially pirates, right? People who are willing to volunteer their efforts on behalf of the Continental Congress. And these people are given permission to harass and attack any British vessels, whether they're military or commercial, and anything they get, spoils of war, that they capture from those ships, or they're allowed to keep for themselves. This is only a real minor impact to the war. It's not like a bunch of pirates show up from the Caribbean, and Johnny Depp-like Captain, pirate people show up and decide to fight. But nevertheless, it's a morale booster. It has some small impact. And then, of course, John Adams served on the Continental Naval Committee, and he's the one who initiates a lot of the initial rules and regulations of the American Navy. And you might be surprised to know some of those rules and regulations are still observed today in the United States Navy. So John Adams has a significant impact for the future Navy. This is something you need to know for the test. The Congress establishes an official independent post office. And they named Ben Franklin to be the first Continental Postmaster General. Now, this is simply the first colonial patriot post office, right? Because there had already been a Royal English post office established in the colonies. And recall, Ben Franklin had been the Postmaster General on behalf of the British government. So it wasn't like he was new to this job. He knew exactly what it took to organize a post office, to implement it. So know for the test that Ben Franklin is the first colonial continental Postmaster General for the Patriots. Because, again, they couldn't just circulate their messages through the Royal Post Office. All their dispatches would be, kept, seized, and read. So they had to have their own post office. They also authorized the printing of continental currency to pay for the expenses of the Congress as they were denoted, such as, forming an army, buying a navy, all this other stuff. Now, the continental dollar, as it becomes, the continental currency, has to be observed, recognized, and accepted for it to be of any value, right? The official money of the day is the English sterling British pound, but the Continental Congress doesn't have a lot of that. So they say, well, let's create our own currency, and we'll just give that in lieu of payment for now. And you can well imagine a lot of people looked at this currency like funny money, like, well, I don't recall seeing this around any time, so some people wouldn't accept it. Certainly the British government didn't sanction it, so they didn't observe it. And then, of course, the Congress, believe it or not, even at this stage, they expressed loyalty to the crown, which is kind of like we are loyal British citizens, right? But they rebuked Parliament for all those acts and all those pieces of legislation they didn't like. But isn't that kind of schizophrenic? Because remember, since the Glorious Revolution of 1688, Britain, England, was ruled collaboratively, co-equally between Parliament and King. So if they are expressing loyalty to the crown, that is the royalty, the king, but then rebuking and defying Parliament, they're really defying the government, because Parliament is half of the English government. So it's kind of schizophrenic. It's not very consistent. Kind of a token gesture, really. Not that either the king or Parliament was particularly impressed with the colonies right now, so I don't think that would have had any value to anybody. You need to know for the test that the Congress does generate what's called the Olive Branch Petition. Now, this is an official document, right? And it is issued with the purpose of it being sent to King George III of England. It pleads for the king directly to nullify the acts of Parliament that were conducted against the colonies. This could have been the Currency Act, the Mutiny Act, the Stamp Act. I mean, not the Stamp Act had already been repealed, but any of the revenue acts they didn't like. They're basically asking the king to absolve the colonies of these unjust acts of Parliament. And this is an olive branch petition, which is how it's actually titled, to try to reach out peaceably to the king and plead for his support. Recognize, of course, that they had already expressed loyalty to the king and the crown. But the king, of course, believes, as Parliament did, that the government is ruled collaboratively between two sides. So it wasn't as if the king had arbitrary power to nullify acts of Parliament just left and right. Okay, and then for the test, you need to know that on June 16th, 1775, George Washington was selected as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, which had only just been formed. It didn't even exist yet. But you needed a leader for that army, and that was going to be George Washington. It was a near unanimous vote. Okay, so what that means is there was some debating. Okay, that went on about who should become the next the new leader of the Continental Army. There were people from the French and Indian War that were well known in the northern colonies. There were people recommended from the southern colonies. But ultimately, John Hancock and the Adamses and others got together during a break during the Congress and said, hey, we need somebody who can really appeal to the southern colonies, somebody well known down there, who would help bring the southern colonies into the northern efforts that are going on, because most of the stuff that happened, right, had taken place in Massachusetts, in the New England area. And they were like, we need someone who's known pretty well, who can bring vested parties together. And they knew George Washington, famous name because he was the hero of Braddock's campaign. Well, he came with a pedigree, right? So he was selected, and it was viewed as a good move for both northern and southern colonies. And this is, again, taking place only a few weeks after Lexington and Concord. Well, Washington is selected, and he stands up and asks permission to address the group. And I think this is remarkable. I'm going to read to you what he said to the assembled congressmen. I think it's remarkable that he had the presence of mind, having just been informed of something that he had no idea was going to take place, that he had the presence of mind to speak this eloquently. But, that's George Washington. He was a very capable speaker and a very smart man. And here's what he said to Congress. Mr. President, meaning John Hancock, who was presiding over the group as the president of the group. Mr. President, though I am truly sensible of the high honor done me in this appointment, yet I feel great distress from a consciousness that my abilities and military experience may not be equal to the extensive and important trust. However, as the Congress desire it, I will enter upon the momentous duty and exert every power I possess in their service and for support of the glorious cause. But lest some unlucky event should happen unfavorable to my reputation, I beg it may be remembered by every gentleman in the room that I, this day, declare with the utmost sincerity, I do not think myself equal to the command I am honored with. So think about that for a minute. George is essentially saying, oh, it's very honorable. You've honored me greatly. I believe that my heart is in this and my will is in this. But understand, if something bad goes down, I didn't seek this position. You bestowed it upon me. I will do my best for you. But if something untoward occurs, I want you to know I probably am not up to doing this successfully, but I'm going to try. It's kind of his early out to save his reputation if things go south. Remember, things didn't go well at Fort Necessity before the French and Indian War. Things really, he was considered a hero of the Braddock campaign, but the Braddock campaign was just a horrible, horrible series of errors, a comedy of errors. So it was a failure. Now, he was successful leading the Virginia militia during the French and Indian War, but understand his military career had been kind of good and bad both, and he was trying to make up for any possible downturn in what might take place. Okay, we've really gone over on this slide because there was so much to tell you. So we're going to stop here. This will be the end of this particular session. We'll pick up with slide 34 on the next video, and we'll just pause here.